host today. We have, as usual, we have a number of very interesting speakers for you. The broadcast, as you'll be aware now, is very much an opportunity for organizations and individuals to showcase their positive climate impact. We are joined today from a number of countries. I'm speaking from Colombia in the coffee region of Colombia. Apologies in advance if there is any background noise here, but it is a working area. We don't have time, Adam, who's over in Stockholm. We have G from Enso Tyres in central London. We have Cecilia in Edinburgh from the Competition and Markets Authority, Roshan from Amazon Watch in Chicago, and I'm waiting for Alexander from Carbon Calories, and I'm not sure where he's dialing in from. But anyway, we're, as you know, we are media partners to We Don't Have Time. Adam at the top there is our contact on this. He'll be with us throughout the broadcast. Rather than me waffle on any longer, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. She's very kindly taking time out of a busy day to speak today. Cecilia Parker Aranha from the Competition and Markets Authority. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are, Cecilia. The floor is yours. We're delighted that you're here today, and we're very interested to hear what you have to say about the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having us along to this. It's a good opportunity for us to tell you about the work that we've been doing. Just by way of introduction, as Gary said, my name is Cecilia Parker Aranha. I'm a Director of Consumer Protection at the UK Competition and Markets Authority. I'm really happy to be here at Climate Solutions Live to talk to you about our work tackling greenwashing. So just a bit about the CMA to begin with. The CMA is the UK's leading competition and consumer protection body. We take enforcement action against businesses who are breaking competition or consumer protection law by treating other businesses or consumers unfairly. And although you might not expect a body like the CMA to be interested in climate change issues, supporting the transition to a low carbon economy is one of our top priorities. And we're doing that in lots of different ways at the moment. We have published advice for businesses who want to cooperate to improve their environmental impact, and we have published that back in January this year. We've also investigated the electric vehicle charging market in the UK and made recommendations to government about how to improve access. And the thing I'm here to talk about today, we are taking action against greenwashing so consumers aren't misled about the products or the services that they're buying. And excuse me if I just have to dance around a little bit. Our lights are on a timer, and if I don't move enough, I will be plunged into darkness.
Yeah, that's okay.
So I'm sure most people in the audience will be familiar with the idea of greenwashing. In general terms, it's when a company or an organization spends more time and money on marketing themselves as environmentally friendly than on actually minimizing their environmental impact. And in the world of consumer protection, we focus on greenwashing, which happens when a business makes environmental claims about itself or its products to give the impression that it's better for the environment than it really is. Now, there's been a big jump in the numbers of consumers who want to buy stuff that's better for the environment, and a corresponding growth in businesses who offer those products. And unfortunately, as a result, we are also seeing a lot more greenwashing. So in November 2020, the CMA joined with our counterparts around the world to lead a sweep of green claims on websites. The sweep was a collaboration between consumer protection authorities and the International Consumer Protection and Enforcement Network, ICPEN, and the European Consumer Protection Cooperation Network. And between us, we looked at hundreds of websites. We found that in about 40% of the green claims we saw, there were suspicions that they weren't being fully honest. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. Some were using very vague terms or were unclear. Some didn't appear to have any evidence to back up their claims. In other cases, it was the appearance of the product that was being advertised that was causing the problem. And so with so many potential problems, the CMA decided that we would tackle the issue head on. And we ran a call for inputs at the end of 2020 to find out more about the problems of greenwashing. We spoke to a lot of different stakeholders, consumer groups, businesses, NGOs, to really find out where the problems lay. And it became clear that greenwashing was a real concern, not just for consumers, but for businesses as well. So in September this year, we published new guidance on making environmental claims on goods and services, which we call our Green Claims Code. And the idea of publishing this guidance, we want to make it clear to businesses what we expect of them. We expect them to stop greenwashing, but we also want to give businesses the confidence to tell people about the great work they are doing. And of course, we want to protect consumers who are trying to choose products and services which are environmentally friendly. So what does our guidance say? Well, first and foremost, businesses making environmental claims have to be truthful and accurate. They can't mislead consumers by giving a false or inaccurate impression of their environmental credentials. Businesses making claims need to be clear and unambiguous. They need to be transparent and straightforward so we can all understand them. Businesses need to use language and images which consumers can easily understand. And one of the things we're encouraging businesses to do is to go out and test their messages. So if a business is going to make a claim, find out what conclusions customers are drawing from it before they actually go ahead and start using it in advertising and marketing. What claims don't say can also influence the decisions consumers make, and so claims made by businesses should not leave out or hide information that consumers need to make informed choices. This sort of thing can happen if a business is focusing on saying one thing but not another, or where it says nothing at all about a particular environmental impact. And it's really important that businesses pay close attention to the information that consumers actually need to make decisions. Now, one area where this is a big problem is around net zero or carbon neutrality. First of all, many consumers don't understand these terms, so it's really important that businesses communicate as clearly as possible. They need to be clear about what they're doing and how they're doing it. They should include information about whether they are actively reducing carbon emissions, and if they're offsetting, how much they're offsetting, and what scheme they're using to offset their emissions. If a business is comparing itself or its products to another business or other products, it needs to be clear when it's making that comparison. It needs to use up-to-date objective information. So for example, if a business makes a claim that its clothing range is now greener, that is likely to be a problem. It's likely to be misleading for consumers. The business doesn't say what it's greener than or why it's greener. If, on the other hand, a business explains that its clothing range contains 50% more recycled fibres, for example, than its previous ranges, then that's less likely to be a problem. Now, one of the perhaps more controversial principles that we came up with was around product life cycle. In an ideal world, as a consumer, we would get comparable information about the whole life cycle of every product on sale. But that's not the world we live in, and it's not currently a legal requirement in the UK. So instead, businesses just need to think about their life cycle to make sure they're not misleading customers. You can base claims on a particular part of an advertised product's life cycle or a part of your business activities, but you need to make clear which aspect you're referring to. And it is still possible to mislead consumers by only focusing on a narrow part of a life cycle. So say, for example, you claim to be reducing the plastic content of your packaging. Most consumers will assume that's a good thing. But actually, if you switch to something that has a higher carbon footprint to manufacture or is harder to recycle, you could well still be misleading consumers by failing to tell them that. And then our final principle is about evidence. So most environmental claims are likely to be objective or factual claims that can be tested against scientific or other evidence. And businesses need to have that evidence to support the claims they're making. They need to have that evidence before they make those claims. And if they don't, then it's a real problem from a consumer perspective. Now, I'm just conscious of time, and I know a lot of you out there listening today will be here as individuals and not as businesses. So you might also like to know that in addition to the guidance for business, we've also come up with some tips for shoppers. I know from personal experience how difficult it can be to shop for goods which I'm certain are not harmful to the environment. And I don't say that the tips we've come up with are bulletproof. But we're advising customers to not to just trust slogans or vague terms, to be wary of phrases like all natural, green and eco, which sound nice but can leave a lot of room for interpretation. We're encouraging consumers to go out and look for evidence. So if you're not sure about a claim, you can check by reading the small print in an advert or by going to the company website for evidence. It shouldn't be difficult to find proof to support a claim made by a company with genuine environmentally friendly practices. And if it is difficult, that's not a good sign for consumers. You need to look past appearances. So images of wildlife or logos with leaves can easily convince you that you're making an environmentally friendly choice. Even the choice of packaging materials can lead you down a wrong path. And I made a mistake recently picking up a container which looked like it was made of natural materials, but actually had a plastic inner bottle glued into it, which made it virtually impossible to recycle. And that takes me on to disposal. So our next tip is about thinking about what you'll do with the packaging and the product once you've finished with it. Businesses should be making clear whether they are making claims about recyclability. They should be making clear whether that's about the product, the packaging, or both. And then our last tip for consumers is really to think about the bigger picture. Just because a product or a service may claim to be environmentally friendly doesn't mean that all of its elements are, or that its overall impact is positive for the environment. There might be information that businesses aren't telling you. So think about the overall environmental impact. Now, just in the last minute or two, I want to just let you know what else the CMA is going to be doing now that we've published our guidance. So our hard work's really just beginning. Over the next few months, we are spreading the word about our Green Claims Code as far and wide as we can. Starting in the new year, we're going to be reviewing how businesses in the UK are doing against our principles. And if we find that there is greenwashing, we plan to take enforcement action to force businesses to clean up their act. Now, greenwashing isn't a uniquely UK phenomenon, and lots of businesses are operating across borders. So the CMA is also continuing to work across borders, particularly with our partners in the International Consumer Protection and Enforcement Network, who we worked with on the sweep last year. And finally, and this is broader than greenwashing, we've been asked to provide advice to the UK government on how consumer protection law in the UK can be changed to help us meet net zero and other sustainability goals. We're running a call for inputs on that at the moment, and people have until the 10th of November to send us their ideas and their thoughts. But for that, we're focusing on three main areas. One is about improving the quality of environmental information. One is about obsolescence and the impact that that's having, whether or not consumer protection law could do more to tackle that. And the third area is overconsumption, where we know certain practices by businesses are causing consumers to buy more and use more than they actually need. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to say, but please do check out our Green Claims Code and follow us on social media for more information.
Thank you, Cecilia. Very interesting. We'll be happy to share the Green Claims Code across the We Don't Have Time network as well. So if anybody is watching this and is interested in downloading it, we'll make links available on a regular basis. We've got questions coming in. I have a question I'd like to ask, if that's okay. Do you find that businesses resist input from yourselves, or do you find it's something that's generally, you know, the input of the CMA into their supply lines, et cetera, is something that they encourage, or do you find there's a degree of resistance?
So I think it varies a lot from business to business. We actually got a lot of really positive responses from businesses on the idea that we were going to produce this guidance. And I think there were a couple of reasons for that. One is that if you are a genuine business and you really want to improve your environmental impact, and I'm not saying you have to be perfect, but you're actually committed to doing something real, they were very supportive of this, because obviously businesses like that are harmed by greenwashing. They don't have a level playing field. The other thing that businesses were interested in was those that lacked the confidence to actually announce what they were doing, because they were worried about being accused of greenwashing. And so they were also quite supportive of the idea of doing more. I would say other businesses have been more resistant, not so much to the idea that greenwashing is bad, but because of the complexity of supply chains. And for example, retailers were concerned that they would be held liable for every misleading green claim that on every product that they sold. And it is the case in the UK that retailers do bear a responsibility, but so do wholesalers, so do manufacturers. And so what we've done with this guidance is really make clear that there are responsibilities across the supply chain. And we hope that in itself will actually encourage businesses to be more honest with each other, and pass down the information that's necessary to make sure that greenwashing doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, reading the Green Claims Code, there seems to be a lot more emphasis now on Scope 3 emissions. I know from a personal point of view, when we've spoken to businesses in the past, they tend to isolate their own operations and hope that Scope 3 emissions, further downstream are being taken care of, and would you say that it's the responsibility of the retailer or the provider to actually disclose information, or are consumers expected to ask for this information, or is it something that should be there at the point of sale?
So, I mean, we would say that in a lot of cases, information should be there at the point of sale. Effectively, any information that a consumer needs to make an informed decision is information that should be provided. At the moment, unfortunately, in the UK, there's no positive obligation to require businesses to disclose their environmental impact. So those that are sharing information, they're typically focused on the good things that they're doing and not on any of the downsides. And businesses which are producing goods which are highly polluting, for example, aren't under any obligation at all to disclose that to consumers, except in limited circumstances. I think over the next months, as we start to look at enforcement cases, one of the things we'll be particularly interested in is how far the requirement not to omit information or to not to hide information actually goes, particularly for businesses which are, as I say, which have more negative impacts on the environment than some of their competitors.
Yeah, I suppose it can be a bit of a minefield as well, because one person's opinion on an environmentally friendly product may be completely different to another's. But anyway, Cecilia, I'm going to have to move on to the next speaker now. It's been really good listening to you. I know that a lot of people, and we don't have time, a lot of organizations and individuals are very, very interested in what you're doing. We'd be delighted if you guys stayed in touch. We don't have time, and as I say, we'd be happy to spread anything that you're doing across the network. And yeah, thank you again. It's been very interesting, and I wish you every success.
That's great. Thank you very much for having me, Gary.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you very much. Okay, and thanks to Cecilia. And now we're going over to London to speak to G, as he likes to be known. G is the CEO of Enso Tyres. He sat waiting eagerly there. So G, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to hear what you have to say about Enso Tyres.
Thank you. Where should we start? Not many people know the impact of tires on the planet, which is something that we at Enso are keen to discuss and address. But in short, tires have quite an impact here in terms of air quality, in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of microplastic pollution, as well as enormous waste at the end of life. And what we're doing at Enso is to develop better tires for electric vehicles. And in doing so, we are developing more energy efficient, more durable, and more sustainable tires, which, of course, as the EV industry transitions into the mainstream, from internal combustion vehicles to electric, which we all support because it addresses climate change, we don't want to forget that the same EVs will also run on tires, that those tires will wear over time. And what is somewhat surprising, but a known fact within the EV community, is that EVs generate more tire pollution and go through more tires on average than normal vehicles do. And this is because of the increased weight and torque of electric cars. So while we address climate change with the adoption of electric vehicles, we are actually increasing the amount of pollution that comes from tires by switching to those EVs. A bit like when we moved to diesel vehicles to reduce carbon, but increased particulate matter and NOx in cities, which was Dieselgate. We're now at the cusp of actually entering into something what could only be characterized as Tiregate, because while the EV industry and the automotive industry has been rapidly advancing on its side, the tire industry has effectively lagged behind. So what is Enso? Well, we are a new company that is developing better tires for electric vehicles to address those problems. And already, of course, we are faced with these challenges, because if we end up with a rapid adoption of electric cars, we end up actually just making the problem worse unless we nip the problem in the bud now. And ultimately, we see the opportunity to work very closely with EV companies as we do, and large EV fleets as we do, to effectively change not only the product, but also the underlying business models. And there are really 4 areas that we need to tackle here. And I understand that this is a subject that many people may not have even thought about, because how often do you think about your tires? But in a nutshell, as we drive, those tires wear, that tire pollution as you drive is both an air pollution problem in cities, and it's also a microplastic pollution problem in our oceans and in our broader ecosystems. So one of the key things we need to make sure is that while EVs are adopted universally, is that we make much more durable tires. That means developing tires that have less pollution in terms of air pollution in cities, where we're already breathing in more tire dust than tailpipe dust today. This has been confirmed by organizations like DEFRA here at the Environmental Agency in the UK, that we've already passed the stage where tire pollution is a bigger problem than tailpipe pollution. But contrast this, there is no law anywhere on the planet that says that you should drive on tires that are more durable, while we've had decades of legislation telling us what is allowed to come out of the tailpipe. So on one hand, we have no legislation, and on the other hand, we have very strict legislation. So we need to see an increase, of course, not just in making better products, but also the regulators stepping in and actually starting to regulate these emissions. Fundamentally, however, if we want to switch increasing numbers of people driving electric vehicles, we have to make sure that those vehicles are cost effective and deliver the range that people need. This means making these tires not just more durable and therefore lower emissions, but also more energy efficient, and hence extend EV range even further. And we at Enso have already shown that we can do this. We recently broke a world hypermiling record on the longest distance ever driven on a Renault Zoe, driving 475 miles on a single charge. And this is on a vehicle that its stated official range is 245 miles on a WLTP measurement scale. So we can show that we're able to deliver better performance, better durability, by relying less on fossil fuels and more on bio-based materials. And this, of course, is more expensive. It is not easy, but what we have found within the tire industry and beyond within the EV industry is that there is a clear willingness to adopt these, but it's very hard for the big majors to do this, just like it was very hard for the big OEMs to make electric cars to begin with. It needed a disruptor, such as Tesla in the EV space, and we're hoping to be that disruptor in the tire industry. I'm happy to take any other questions and describe it in a bit more detail what we do, but ultimately it's about delivering better, less polluting, more energy efficient tires to the future, while we all readily and as fast as possible adopt electric mobility.
Okay, thank you very much, G. We've had some questions coming in. I've got one question here from Mike in the UK, in Western Superman. Mike, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I hope everybody can hear me. G, yeah. Thanks for that. Can I just ask, is there a different production method to conventional tyres to what you'll be using? You need different equipment, machinery?
No, the technology is mainly embedded within the tire compounds and the tire design itself, but we use standard manufacturing equipment at present to make these tires. So these are not looking any different. They're black, they're round, they have a hole in the middle. And they have just a different brand on them, but what's inside is what makes all the difference.
Okay, and this is just we're talking about cars and small vans, or are these going to go to the HGV sort of industry as well in the future?
Well, at the moment, of course, most electric vehicles are the smaller end of the spectrum between the Teslas and actually up to a few SUVs, but the bulk is actually smaller vehicles. And of course, you have various different penetrations of EVs. They tend to be in cities. They tend not to be in the HGVs at the moment in numbers, although those will be increasing in the future. And just to clarify one thing, which we often get, we don't discriminate between between hydrogen or pure battery vehicles. Both of them are effectively electric, but we are not looking to supply fossil fuel cars. One of the reasons for that, of course, is that the market for tires for those vehicles is heavily saturated with inferior products. Number two, the electric vehicle revolution is happening, and we want to be part of that, not the past. But ultimately, electric vehicles need better tires, even beyond what the ICE vehicles need. If you improve the energy efficiency of a tire, you get a far bigger bang for your buck on an EV when you fit those tires on that vehicle than you would fit it on a comparable ICE vehicle in terms of increased range, simply because the energy efficiency is much higher in an EV. But also because the added weight and torque of electric vehicles means that they wear out tires faster. And within areas such as London, which now, as of Monday, has ULEZ expansion, you have large corporates that are now buying EVs as fast as they can possibly do, because we now have this issue that you otherwise have to pay 12.5 pounds every time you drive into the city. And so all of these electric vehicles that are coming into the market are great. They address climate change. But I can tell you from having spoken to those fleets operators that they're seeing rates of tire consumption in the region of 30 to 50% faster than currently would have been in the case with an identical electric van or electric car that they used to run up until now. So overall, everyone is embracing the electric revolution, which we want them to do. But the one cost that is going up, it's not the energy consumption, although the vehicle's more expensive over time, it's cheaper. It's actually the tire costs. Those are actually going up. And we don't see this as an opportunity to sell more tires. What we want to do is make tires last longer so that ultimately we produce less of them, we depend less on the resources of our planet, and we create less pollution.
Yeah, I suppose that ties in exactly with what Cecilia finished on, what she touched on in her presentation in overconsumption, you know. I mean, where do we find this information from, G? I mean, before we started speaking to yourselves, I wasn't aware of any of these problems. You know, I wasn't even aware that EVs were heavier, you know, and I wasn't aware this was a problem. Is there somewhere we could go to find out that, you know, to see the results of these trials that you've done, or is it your website? Is it, you know?
We will be disclosing our trials that we're running now. We're doing trials with DPD and Royal Mail, which is public. We're also developing tires for electric taxis, and we work with a number of other OEMs as well, but that's confidential, sadly, at this stage, but they will come out into market soon. We're launching commercially here in London to begin with, beginning of next year, and then we will expand it to other EV hotspots in Europe and North America. We effectively go where the EVs roam. So our market is the EV market, and we have to follow where that herd is going. What I can only say is that that herd differs between European markets and North American markets. In Europe, you have more fleets, you have like large companies buying these in bulk. In North America, they tend to be more individually owned by people basically driving Teslas. So the market varies depending on the geography, but ultimately we need to deliver much better tires to not create effectively an environmental calamity in the future, because tires is the only part of the electric car that relies substantially on fossil fuels. Most tires today are made out of fossil fuels. They have a short lifespan with a lot of pollution and a lot of waste at the end of the life, while consuming more energy over its entire life cycle than actually they need. And this is what we are looking to change. We're looking to develop bio-based tires made out of recycled raw materials as well, making them last longer with less pollution, and at the end of life, taking care of them in a circular way.
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I'd say the same to you as I did to Cecilia. You know, we'd be delighted if we don't have time to hear about your information as it's released, whatever stage it is. We'd encourage you to stay in touch, and we'd be delighted to invite you back at a later date to discuss on another broadcast if you'd like to come on. It's an open invitation. G, all I can do is thank you for your time today. It's been very interesting listening to you, and wish you every success.
Thank you so much. Have a really good day, Gary. And thank you, Mike, for the question.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
I think now we're going to go over to Adam. Sorry. We're going to go over to...
I believe Alexander's here. He's here.
Alexander, yeah, you've just flashed up on my screen, Alexander. I was starting to panic there. Alexander is with us from Carbon Calories. And once again, the floor is yours, Alexander. We're delighted to see you here today, and we're very interested to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. This is great. I'm really excited to be here. I should connect with Cecilia, because Carbon Calories is sort of trying to address some of the same issues that you're doing through. It seems like, or it looked to me like, regulation or lobbying or regulatory oversight over small businesses or businesses disclosing. But Carbon Calories, in short, offers an antidote to greenwashing in the form of a consumer-centric disclosure framework or a reporting framework to report the product carbon footprint of a product. So brands can use our reporting framework to disclose the product carbon footprint of their products. And that is not many brands are disclosing right now. And part of the reason is not only the cost, there's a cost hurdle to overcome. If every government in the world tomorrow regulated that every brand had to disclose the product carbon footprint of their portfolio offering or their brand, their products to consumers, most businesses, let's call it 95% SMEs, wouldn't be able to afford existing solutions for it at the quality level or at the regulatory or at the compliance level, let's call it, in order to comply with the 3 internationally accepted carbon accounting, product carbon accounting and reporting standards that are available in the world. So we're also working to overcome that problem by giving small businesses more streamlined tools. And this is important because we're not going to go from 0 to 100% overnight. And so small businesses have to step into reporting. Large businesses, for the most part, can afford existing solutions, but because there's no regulation, they have no incentive to disclose, because why put your feet to the fire? It's my general impression. You know, there might be exceptions, but objectively, large companies have had a decade to perform carbon accounting on their products and to disclose. Now, again, because there's no reporting framework that's commonly used, so that our brands, large or small, know that when they report using this framework, consumers are going to understand it, and they're going to be sort of like in compliance, and other companies are going to be able to cross-compare these products. Because that doesn't exist yet or is not widely used, there's no commonly used framework, that does make it difficult for any brand, large or small, whether or not they have the money to perform carbon accounting, to actually disclose. But that seems like a challenge that can be overcome, and that's what Carbon Calories is providing with our reporting framework. It's called the Carbon Statement. And I'll say about that you know, when we all took math in high school or in college, if you show your work, even if you get the answer wrong, you often got credit. And that sort of is how I think about transparency. You know, we're not expecting companies to provide perfect product carbon footprints. That's too expensive for most. What we are expecting is that you are transparent about where you are in the process of preparing a product carbon footprint, to disclose what you are and are not able to do yet as a business to decarbonize. Because, you know, the big elephant in the room, we're emitting about 55 gigatons a year, and there's no such thing as sort of a zero carbon product yet in the market. Maybe there are a few, but very rarely. Consumer goods and other goods it's going to take us decades to decarbonize. And so for every business, it's going to take decades to decarbonize their business activities. And I think that we just have to be realistic about that. And so, nutrition, the nutrition labels on the back of food products weren't regulated, at least in America, until the 1993 NEA Act. I think it stood for Nutrition Education Act. But in the 70s and the 80s, companies did start disclosing the nutrition content of their products. So that, or the order of that timeline is significant because, product carbon footprint disclosure, we might not have time to wait for regulation to catch up with the disclosures or to actually regulate it. And we might not need to, obviously we need to move faster than 2 decades, like it took nutrition labels. But I think that sort of provides just a model or analogous model for how this can happen. And the last thing I'll talk about is that in terms of disclosure, yes, businesses certainly need to be careful of what they talk about, and they need to be diligent and transparent and sort of disclose what assumptions they made and what be very, very transparent about what they're saying about their claims. I think that brands, it's very easy. It would be easy for them to compare their, I actually really appreciate what Cecilia said about comparing their products to their historical performance, because that's a great way to show the progress of your journey and compare your product to a presumably higher carbon product previously. But I think that it's also really important for consumers to understand that they can't just buy their way into sustainability or low carbon. I hate to use the word sustainability, but they can't buy their way into a low carbon product. It's sort of this t-shirt. If I wear this t-shirt 50 times, let's say, which is maybe half of its useful lifespan, typically, maybe 100 times is its maximum lifespan before it starts getting holes. But if I wear this t-shirt 50 times and I wash and dry it in a hot water and I dry it in a regular, top loading dryer, I will, as a consumer, have contributed to 50% approximately maybe of the product carbon footprint over the lifespan of use. And so if I just hang dry this t-shirt, I can immediately decrease the carbon intensity of this t-shirt by 20-25% over its full lifespan. And so that's where, yes, we need brands to be disclosing, but we also need consumers to pick up their act too and sort of do what they can do right now, because it's going to take decades to transform our electricity to make it renewable. So in the meantime, the only way to effectively reduce the carbon intensity of washing and drying is to wash cold and hang dry in this example. And so for each product, there are examples like that. If you could buy a really carbon efficient t-shirt, if you only wear it twice, then nothing about it was carbon efficient. If you buy a really carbon intensive t-shirt, let's say conventional cotton, wholesale, 25% of the inventory was never sold, and I actually accredit that to the sold product, or I allocate it to the sold product, but if you wore it 100 times, much more carbon efficient than any low carbon t-shirt you have in your wardrobe. So it's consumers certainly have a really critical role to play. And I think it's exciting because consumers can actually lead decarbonization by catalyzing a consumer-driven demand loop for not just low carbon products from businesses, but also they can support just largely just consuming less, because there's really, I haven't seen any scenario for decarbonization that does not involve lifestyle adjustments, not sort of nothing crazy, but lifestyle adjustments primarily by the Westerners or OECD nations, citizens in OECD nations. Anyone who earns more than about $50,000 to $75,000 a year is among the richest 10% of humanity. And that fraction of humanity is accountable for about 50% of global emissions. And so while we're decarbonizing, we definitely need to be adjusting our lifestyles. And so that's where Carbon Calories comes in. We're trying to help brands communicate the value of their product to customers, communicate their story, talk about their decarbonization journey, be on the same page, be transparent, say what information they have, what they don't have, and then educate consumers in the process so the consumers can not just buy efficient or low carbon products, but also make sensible and responsible lifestyle decisions as they consume those products. You know, we live in a market, there are buyers and suppliers, there are consumers and producers, and it takes two to tango. So everyone needs to sort of like play their role and do what they can. So that's sort of like the vision and the sort of like spirit behind carbon calories. But I'm really excited to answer any questions.
Alexander, I agree 100% with everything you've just said. We have, you know, we have physical experience of the things that you've just said to us. I mean, we're always asked how consumers can play their part in this. Not many people are aware of the things they should be doing, and they are led by whatever a retailer or an online web shop actually tells them. When you talk about the positioning of carbon calories, from what I can gather is you're offering, you're positioning yourself in the market as an answer to the SMEs that can't sort of afford to go down the same route as the large corporates.
Yeah,
I mean, we've come across this. We come across it every week, to be perfectly honest with you, in another business, where retailers often come back to us and say, well, once you have an LCA that's approved and it's acceptable and this and that and the other, we can start talking. Until then, you know, we've nothing to talk about. Is that why carbon calories exist? To bridge that gap between what the corporates?
Partly. I mean, there are maybe, let's say there's 500 companies that have submitted EPDs or some form of product carbon footprint disclosure, usually in the form of a life cycle assessment. Those are like 15 or 20 page disclosures typically. I mean, no consumer is going to read a 20-page report to make a decision. But you know, there are quality controls when it comes to a life cycle assessment, a product carbon footprint assessment. There are standards that are to be followed. Now you can use them differently, the same way that in finance, GAAP accounting rules, two companies could use the same GAAP accounting standards and have different results on their income statement or their tri statements. So you can use the guidelines differently, but there is obviously, in the ideal world, every company can afford full compliant carbon accounting and disclosure. In the ideal world, we're not there yet. We're not going to go from 0 to 100. This is not something that we can't. It's not there's no product market fit yet for something that all SMEs or all businesses can use, and we have to meet the market where it is. And so Carbon Calories offers more streamlined assessments that are definitely based on the standards. I've built wikicarbon.org to share some of the information about the standards and the methodologies to consumers. Yes, we rely on those standards because those are the internationally accepted standards, and they're based on a scientific reality, of which there is one reality physically in the world. And so we're all trying to reflect that reality. And so yeah, we're trying to basically bring the market to full disclosure, because we need more carbon accountants to do that. We need businesses might need to charge a little more for some of their products to do it. They might need some time to integrate those workflows into their business operation. This is not just like an accounting problem. They also have to actually integrate assessing or collecting information, and then actually executing and planning and strategizing and executing decarbonization, and then tracking and then reporting. And like, that is a workflow. That's you know, I sometimes tell companies or some investors actually primarily that QuickBooks didn't put CPAs or accountants out of business. Like, you still have accounting departments, even though we have technological means to do much more high level or advanced or complex accounting work. So I don't know if that answers your question. That might have been a little bit of a ramble, but yeah, we're trying to step businesses into it, you know. So that's where we offer. And really the most important thing that I want to point out is that our carbon statement actually lists the carbon emissions by life cycle stage and provides some other information like some general specs. And that kind of transparent disclosure is what people need in order to start developing tacit knowledge and sort of an understanding of, oh, is 7 kilograms a lot for a t-shirt, or is 10 a lot, or what? And with that, so we're only going to get that by transparent disclosure. I'm not going to release my carbon statement or a Carbon Calories carbon statement and say like this was carbon negative or this is carbon zero. Like a brand can do it on their own, and we'll certainly connect them with high quality carbon offsets. But like that's not the kind of claim or the kind of work that I think that the market really needs. Like we need to start understanding what the carbon intensity of our lifestyles are, and brands need to help us with that. And they can differentiate themselves. There are plenty of innovators and early adopters in the market that are actually integrating low carbon production in their system, and so in their business activities, and they should be differentiating themselves because those products need to replace status quo carbon intensive products.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Cecilia was talking about fits in with what you've just said there.
Exactly,
Alexander. I mean, basically, the consumers are going to start asking these questions. You know,
they
how is
already
this?
are.
Yeah,
and businesses have an opportunity to lead that, to actually the first. You know, there are less than 100 businesses globally, maybe, that actually report a consumer-facing friendly carbon footprint. I mean, there are certainly more in Europe right now. The market is a little bit more nascent in America, in North America. I don't quote me on that 100. You know, there might be more. I certainly haven't seen a consolidated repository besides EPD of brands that disclose. Most of the brands, if I'm not mistaken, in EPD or in EnvironDeck, I forget what the company, EnvironDeck, I forget the company's called, but most of the brands in there, if I'm not mistaken, are B2B suppliers of intermediate products, so not B2C. But you know, any brand that wants to start disclosing, you have an opportunity to like differentiate yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
As consumers forever, because you're going to be recognized as like one of the first 100 or 1,000 brands that started this movement of disclosure.
But I think the choice is rapidly being taken out of the business's hands of whether they do this. You know, the work that Cecilia is doing with the CMA is very much obliging them to comply with this. You know, Mike, do we have? Sorry, Alexander. I think we've had a question come in.
Yeah, I just think on where consumers and small businesses are educating themselves on sort of carbon and greenhouse gases. Can you tell us the difference between the two?
Yeah, so greenhouse gases refers to there's about 206 greenhouse gases in the world. The big three, as I call them, are CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. CO2 on a 100-year global warming potential basis accounts for about 75% of global emissions. On a 500-year global warming percentage basis, I think it's closer to 85%. So CO2 is the big one. Methane, of course, is also big. It also has a slightly different timeline for heating the atmosphere. Yeah, carbon sometimes is used. I use it synonymously to refer to all greenhouse gases. That's not always the way that people use it. Some people use carbon to refer to specifically carbon. And then there's a multiplier, like the molecular weight of carbon is 12.011, and the molecular weight of CO2 is 44.099, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, you can convert carbon into CO2 by multiplying by 3.664. And so, but yeah, carbon and greenhouse gases I use synonymously to refer to all greenhouse gases.
Okay, Alexander, it's been very interesting listening to you today. Like I said to Cecilia and to G before, you stay in touch with us. We'd be delighted to have you back to see how things progress. As the questions come in from the viewers, which they tend to after the event, we'll pass them on to yourself, and we'll make your answers known to the network. And all it remains for me to say is thank you very much for the time you spent today. I'm 100% behind what you have to say. We've experienced everything you've said in your presentation in another business that we have. and it was very helpful to hear what you said.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Mike and Gary, and have a good one.
Yes, and you. Okay, I think we're going to go over to Roshan from Amazon Watch. Roshan, you there? Hi, I can see you now. Roshan, as I said to the previous guys, it's good to have you here. I'll leave you to do your own introduction. We're all ears. The floor is yours.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here at a pretty significant moment for the Amazon rainforest to talk about our work at Amazon Watch and share some of the most important things happening right now for indigenous rights and rainforest protection in the Amazon basin. So obviously, as I just mentioned, my name is Roshan. I work for Amazon Watch. We are an organization that partners with indigenous and environmental organizations in the Amazon basin in campaigns for human rights, for corporate accountability, and the preservation of the Amazon's ecological systems and indigenous cultures. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. So since 1996, we've just sort of been working towards that goal of stopping Amazon destruction, advancing indigenous solutions, and overall supporting climate justice more broadly. So the Amazon, when we talk about the Amazon, it's the largest and most bioculturally diverse tropical rainforest in the world. It's home to 511 indigenous nations, including 66 uncontacted groups living in voluntary isolation. And those groups speak over 300 languages in between them and span over 9 countries. The Amazon is also home to a full third of the Earth's terrestrial plant and animal species, 20% of its flowing fresh water. So, this is a hugely important ecosystem, both from a biodiversity perspective, but also in terms of climate regulation and carbon sequestration. It's uniquely influential, and it's a region that indigenous peoples have stewarded for millennia. Globally, indigenous peoples safeguard the vast majority of the world's biodiversity, and the Amazon is a part of that trend. It's no exception. So at Amazon Watch, we move with the knowledge that indigenous peoples are, not only is this just the moral thing to do to sort of resist against the tide of colonialism and to support indigenous self-determination under any circumstance, but also, indigenous peoples are the best stewards of these lands. And so standing in solidarity with them it's the most just and ecologically sustainable way to address climate change and rainforest destruction. So what we do at Amazon Watch is we recognize that these indigenous knowledges and cultures and traditional practices and sciences are the backbone of sustainable and equitable stewardship of the Amazon. So we try to sort of work in solidarity with these groups to promote indigenous solutions, expand capacity for indigenous leaders, especially women, to maintain their autonomy and sovereignty in the stewardship of their ancestral lands. We do this in a number of different ways. We work against financial institutions, we challenge large corporations, we work for accountability from governments, facing up against all of these major drivers of Amazon destruction, and just trying to push back against ecosystem collapse and against the sort of modern day incarnations of colonialist land grabs and anti-indigenous action. So we do spend a lot of time and effort partnering with these indigenous organizations in the Amazon basin, doing solidarity work and supporting their struggles on the ground. But one of the other ways that we try to work toward protecting the Amazon and fight for climate justice and indigenous rights from where we are in the United States is through our climate finance work, which is specifically what I work on at Amazon Watch. And the principle here is really just follow the money. The absolute worst companies engaging in Amazon destruction and violation of indigenous rights, you have giant agribusiness companies like Cargill and JBS, mining companies like Vale and Anglo American. These companies need the services of financial institutions like banks and asset managers to actually be able to continue these destructive operations. And those financial institutions are often right in our backyard here in the States. when companies need loans for big mining operations or for oil extraction, they go to banks like JP Morgan Chase and Citi and Wells Fargo, who are actually, those are the top 3 financiers of fossil fuels in the world. And these companies, if they're publicly traded, which they typically are, their shares and their bonds are bought up by asset managers like BlackRock and Vanguard. So, I hate to say it, but if your retirement money is in BlackRock or Vanguard, you may be being drawn into this whole mess and you might not even know it, because together they hold over $42 billion in debt and equity in oil companies operating in the Amazon. And they're also some of the biggest investors in companies engaging in deforestation and in indigenous land rights violations in the Amazon. So what we do in our climate finance work is to go after these banks and those asset managers and pressure them to stop pouring money into the destruction of the Amazon and the climate crisis and violation of indigenous rights. And so we're currently campaigning on major banks to cease all financing of oil and gas in the Amazon biome. And we're also pushing BlackRock specifically to adopt deforestation and indigenous rights policy. So then the other prong of my work is working against false solutions for the Amazon. And, a lot of these big corporations and financial institutions, we had prior speakers in this podcast talk about greenwashing. A lot of these corporations and financial institutions are doing the same thing. They're trying to appear like they're climate conscious, like they're really green. They made these commitments to net zero emissions, usually net zero by 2050. And, theoretically, what net zero means is it's the point at which all emissions they release are countered by the emissions that they absorb. Unfortunately, these net zero commitments typically just end up being, total corporate greenwash. And they can actually result in really harmful consequences for forests and for indigenous communities. And one of the biggest problems here is reliance on carbon offsets. Now, the way offsets work typically is that for every, X amount of carbon a big polluter emits, they pay a certain amount of money to create or maintain attractive forests or grasslands or some other type of land that absorbs carbon. So in theory, the carbon that land absorbs is equal to the carbon that is emitted by this company. In practice, it really doesn't work anything like that. So first of all, the actual science behind this idea that you can offset large-scale carbon emissions with nature-based absorption it's pretty uncertain, it's pretty unsettled. And in fact, the latest research indicates that it's not actually possible to sort of one-to-one match emissions with absorption like that. And just as importantly, offsets can be really harmful for indigenous communities. These forested land tracts that are sold for offsets are often located on indigenous land that's taken without their consent or consultation. We've seen this happen in the Amazon. We have numerous examples of partner organizations dealing with this. And then on the other end, you have these companies who effectively have a license to keep polluting. And so the local air pollution they generate harms the communities around those sites. And often those are, frontline communities of color, working class communities. So it's just an all around bad proposition. So Amazon Watch, just over the past month, we helped lead an effort to release a statement against offsets that has been signed by over 180 environmental, human rights, and indigenous groups from all over the world. And, that's everyone from environmental justice groups in the US to conservationists in the UK, to indigenous groups in Colombia, to farmers unions in Niger. So we're really starting to see a global grassroots movement against offsets and against false solutions, and demanding a real emissions reductions and real protection for forests and indigenous people's rights. So in terms of what this moment for the Amazon looks like, especially in the lead up to COP, just last month on September 10th, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, which is sort of a big gathering of conservation organizations, typically not especially inclusive of indigenous populations. But this year, they approved a visionary proposal by indigenous leaders in the Amazon basin, and bolstered by us at Amazon Watch and our partners, to permanently protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025. So this campaign is called 80 by 25. And it's an urgent call from indigenous peoples for a global pact to avert the tipping point at which the Amazon enters the process of savannification and becomes, irreversibly damaged. And it's a really crucial opportunity to avoid this climate disaster. And so in just a few days, Amazon Watch is heading to COP26 alongside our Indigenous partners to essentially attempt to move 80 by 25 forward. The proposal is, it's Indigenous led, and Amazon Watch is acting as part of its executive committee to support capacity building, strategy, communications, and of course through solidarity funding for Indigenous partners. So, we're working really hard to support that. It's a critical time for the Amazon, for Indigenous rights and the future of the global climate, and the importance of what happens in the coming months and the next year or so really can't be overstated. So with that, I think that's kind of an overview of what we're about, and I will leave it open to questions.
Yeah, very interesting, Roshan. We've been asked a few questions regarding Amazon Watch's work in particular. How do people support you? What's the method for actually supporting the work that you do? I mean, bear in mind that you're speaking to the converted on the We Don't Have Time network. It's a huge network, but we regularly get asked, how do people support work like you do?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, we're a nonprofit. We run on donations. So if you are able to donate, you can at our website, amazonwatch.org. Donations, we put them to work right away. We allocate a significant amount of our budget to, direct support to Indigenous partners. So that's where a lot of your donations will go. And then also to our programs working to advance these solutions. So we always appreciate that. Also, if you go to amazonwatch.org, you can just subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on the most important kind of events and opportunities that come up to move these campaigns that we're working on forward. You can also follow us on social media. Our handle on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is just at Amazon Watch, all one word. So yeah, especially if you do kind of subscribe to the newsletter, very often we have sort of digital actions that people can take part in, as well as in-person actions, usually based in the California Bay Area. That's where most of our employees are. But there are a lot of opportunities for webinars, for sort of digital pressure actions, social media blasts, things like that people can get involved with if they stay up to date on that by subscribing to our newsletter. So
okay.
Yeah, that's about it.
All right. Well, look, stay in touch with us. I think Mike, you've got another question that's coming, yeah?
I have, yes. You mentioned Amazon Watch's programs to expand the capacity for Indigenous leaders, particularly women. Can you elaborate on what those programs are and the why behind them?
Yeah, totally. So the first one, well, I don't know, not the first, but like one of them is the Amazon Defenders Fund. And so that's something that we've had since 2006, where we more or less mobilize resources to support our Indigenous partner organizations directly. And so it's this formalized program called the Amazon Defenders Fund, which is essentially, in practice, it looks like flexible, timely, and direct solidarity funds into the hands of Indigenous leaders, people, and organizations to advance their autonomy and self-determination. So in recent years, we've been able to actually really increase that capacity. And at this point, about a third of our budget goes directly to that. So just direct solidarity funds to these Indigenous organizations. It's a pretty notable program. I haven't worked at a lot of places that do things like this. It's pretty cool. And it's kind of guided by this idea of decolonizing philanthropy and moving funds to Indigenous partners to amplify their solutions and their voices. And it's one of the primary mechanisms for, donors who wish to really effectively and rapidly reach people who are directly affected by some of the threats that we work against. We've built this on a kind of a multi-decade track record as a partner among these communities, and have worked to build up trust. And it's been critical in responding to some of these really accelerating crises, including the fires in the Amazon since 2019, as well as COVID-19, and responding to that, and recent increases in threats against Earth defenders and attacks against some of these folks. So it's an important resource that we hope to be able to continue to provide. And then the other thing to mention, especially in relation to women, is we just launched this program this year called Women Defenders of the Amazon. It's under the leadership of Nina Gwalinga, who is an international advocate for women's and indigenous rights and climate justice. She's from the Sarayaku community in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and she has extensive experience sort of raising awareness and campaigning and addressing the injustices occurring against indigenous peoples in the Amazon. So that program is sort of built to support indigenous women's leadership and self-determination by increasing long-term capacity building, training, education. It elevates the sort of healing, wisdom, economic, and culture initiatives led by women. It supports sustaining ancestral knowledge and cultural heritage, and accompanies women land defenders for personal safety and supports their security. And then also, we're trying through this program to strengthen connections between indigenous women across the Amazon and sort of help build that network. So those are two of the sort of like direct support programs that we engage in.
Yeah, a lot of what you say there, Roshan, resonates with us over in Colombia here. Look, it's been fascinating to hear from you, Roshan. I can only thank you, as I have done the other panelists today.
Of course, thank you so much.
Please stay in touch with us. We'd be delighted to spread the word of the work that Amazon Watch is doing across the We Don't Have Time network. It is a substantial network. And again, there's an open invitation. Come back to us and speak to us about the progress of the individual programs. We'd be delighted to have you back and speak again.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Not at all, Roshan. Thank you for coming. Okay, I think right now I'd like to go to Adam of We Don't Have Time, if he's about there, just to close out things today. I know that We Don't Have Time have a lot of work to be done over the next few weeks regarding a certain conference that they're going to be appearing at and speaking at. Adam, would you like to say a few words about We Don't Have Time and COP26?
Yes, sure. First of all, I just want to say that, I mean, from speaking from the perspective of We Don't Have Time, who our passion is highlighting the good things that are being done for the climate and making sure that we can do more of them. We're really happy that we've been able to listen to these initiatives that we've had on this program so far. Each of you have been so inspiring and also lifting up something new that we haven't really thought about before, which I think is super important. So I'm really happy that you joined us for this. As for COP26, we'll be doing even more of that, actually. So if you like hearing about things you might not have heard about before, if you like hearing about the tough issues and how we can solve them, as in with regards to climate change, we're going to actually be we're going to be creating a program each day from COP26, except for Sunday the 7th, where we'll be resting a little bit. But all of the other evenings, British time, we'll be broadcasting live from Glasgow. We'll be bringing in speakers from Glasgow. We'll be bringing in speakers from our hubs in Stockholm, Washington, DC, and Nairobi. And we'll be bringing in speakers from all over the world via Zoom to comment on the different aspects of the climate crisis, how we can solve it, and also, of course, how the negotiations are going. So if you want to follow the COP26 negotiations and the climate discussion as a whole, then I invite you to join our COP26 backdoor digitally. And just go to wedon'thavetime.org/COP26 and you'll find all the information you need there. And we hope to see you there. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Thank you very much, Adam. And as usual, thanks to everyone behind the scenes that We Don't Have Time for helping us with this. A huge thank you to the panelists today, to the guest speakers, Roshan, Alexander, to G, and of course to Cecilia at the Competition and Markets Authority. We do this every month. We're a platform for people to come on and talk about their progress, their projects, their initiatives. We'd be delighted to hear from you all in the future. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. It just remains for me to say thanks to everyone, and